Well, good morning, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. Welcome to this day of learning hosted by the Presbyterian Foundation. My name is Joseph Moore, and I'm a pastor and one of your ministry relations officers here at the Foundation. I want to welcome you on behalf of the trustees and staff of the Foundation. We are so grateful you're joining us for this event. Our theme today centers around the topic of storytelling. We will touch on things like stewardship programming, legacy, and planned giving, but all of it will revolve around the idea that the stories we tell and how we tell those stories, it really matters. So as we begin our time together today, let us begin by praying to the one who is the source of all that gives life to the stories each of us live. Let us pray. Holy God, we are inheritors of and participants in your story of grace and love for this, your world. Open us this day to your spirit and to new ways of seeing and telling others of your work in our midst. Show us how we might invite others to participate in that gracious work. Bless our time together today, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. We are indeed a storied people who for 2,000 years have received the good news through stories. And we live in a time when, for reasons that are important theologically as well as strategically, the stories we tell, they have a direct impact on the ministry in which we engage and the ways we motivate others to join in that ministry. If we truly believe the Spirit continues to be at work in our midst, then we need to find creative and compelling ways to share her work with the world and to invite others to join in that work. That's the root of our work as the church, and it's a good generosity strategy as well. So our hope is that today will provide a framework for how you might think about the stories you are or are not telling. How might those stories be more effectively told? How can the stories we tell, how can we tell them in such a way that people are inspired to think about their own stories, even their legacy, as it relates to the story? We are really glad that you're here. I also hope that today you'll be reminded that you do not have to do this work alone. The Presbyterian Foundation is, well, we are a vibrant part of the PCUSA, and we are here to partner and to walk with you. You are not alone. If you remember nothing else today, I hope you remember that. Today we'll have 3 workshops. Our first workshop is led by Robyn Sekula, who will invite us to think about how we might go about discerning what our story is. How would you describe your church? How does your church spend its time? How do you connect with your community? And how do you tell those stories? Immediately after Robyn's presentation at 12 o'clock Eastern, we'll roll right into a workshop led by the Reverend Ellie Kelly, who will invite us to consider stewardship as telling stories celebrating mission and vision. And then we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A with both Robyn and Ellie, and then we'll take a break. Finally, at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, the Reverend Sandra and Karl Mattison will offer a presentation focusing on legacy giving as an opportunity to continue your story. What do you want that story to be after your life? And then there will be another Q&A with Sandra and Karl from 3 to 3:15 Eastern. 3 different but equally important workshops for you to consider as you look at your own contexts. All 3 workshops will be recorded with the link sent out next week to all of our registrants. We're using the webinar version of Zoom today, and seeing as we have almost 600 people registered for this day of learning, we have the chat function open, but you're encouraged to use the Q&A button to submit any questions you'd like addressed during the Q&A period. Again, please use the Q&A button if there's questions you'd like addressed during the Q&A section after each of the workshops. Please don't hesitate to submit questions, and if we can't get to all of them, we'll do our very best to have our presenters submit written responses to the ones we can't get to today. Thanks again for joining us, and with those logistical notes, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Robyn Sekula, Vice President of Marketing at the Foundation, a former journalist, and an all-around great storyteller to share with us this morning. Robyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm really very excited to be with you today. And as Joseph said, I'm the Vice President of Communications and Marketing here at the Foundation. And that's nice, but how does that translate to the church world? And that's where I want to take you today. For more than 20 years, I've been a member of a church here in Louisville, Kentucky. And I want to tell you the story of why I came back to my church after a difficult season and some challenging circumstances. There are many, many churches that experienced challenges due to COVID. Our church did too. We were no exception. Our church made some really difficult personnel decisions that affected my entire family. We had an interim pastor who was really struggling to connect with the congregation, which was indeed very challenging during COVID. You can't see folks in person. How do you get to know them? It's really tough. We had a very significant church lay leader who was a close friend who passed away. And he was quite young. Going to church became really heavy and difficult for me, and at least 20 close friends of mine left. I don't blame them. I was really on the fence myself. I decided to take a break. I attended church with my mom for a little while, who's also now Presbyterian. I considered leaving and checking out some other churches, and I did that somewhat. But it was really the people in the pews that brought me back. And this is really my stewardship story. I want to tell you why I went back, because it's largely the same reason that motivates me to continue to support the congregation through good stewardship. And it's a call that I felt from God more keenly after this experience. I went to Spain in the summer of 2022 with my family. It was a really glorious trip. It was a little bit too hot, but long delayed because of COVID. We boarded our beloved black lab, Augie. He was a pandemic puppy. Our three daughters kind of forced us into a corner and made us get a dog during the pandemic, as happened, I think, to a lot of families. We went to the pound and we said we would like a small adult dog, and they said we have a large puppy, and we said okay. So when our trip was delayed getting back from Spain for 4 days, thanks to United Airlines, we got delayed by 2 days in Spain, and then another day when we landed in DC, and we finally got home on Sunday. We were supposed to get home on Thursday. When we landed in Louisville, my phone immediately rang. We had a call from the boarding facility that was holding Augie that said he was not doing well. We drove home. My oldest daughter took off for the boarding facility to pick up Augie right away. When we got home, I was waiting on my daughter to bring back Augie. Without anybody knowing about how this trip was ending, we came home to find bags of groceries complete with ice packs on our back steps, so that when we came home, there would be breakfast waiting for us. Fresh orange juice, bagels, cream cheese. We were so hungry, and it was so welcome and so kind. What a kind gesture. I rushed to the vet with Augie, who we were told was very sick, and at 3 a.m. we got that dreaded call to come and say goodbye. We didn't make it. My husband had to FaceTime with us at the vet so he could see him one last time, because my husband had contracted COVID on the trip. The next morning, we woke up to a slew of texts from church friends, more than any other group, that expressed sympathy, kindness, empathy for our situation. And few of these people ever even met Augie. They didn't know him. Went outside to check the mail on that Monday afternoon and found a plate of fresh baked chocolate chip cookies, and they were still warm from the oven. They were sitting on our back steps. We received the world's largest fruit basket and with gourmet cheeses with a really kind note. We received flowers, lovely notes, and just cards, and even a call from the pastoral staff. And let me tell you one more piece of this. Next slide. We live in Indiana, and the church is in Kentucky, and these lovely saints had to cross a bridge and pay a toll both ways to bring these blessings to us. What an incredibly kind and thoughtful and caring congregation. I hadn't set foot in that church for months. These people just cared for us and they loved us while we were hurting. It was in the months following that that I realized that yes, a pastor does a lot, and pastors can change things in a church for better or for worse. But the church is the members and the people. We were there before the challenges we had been through, and we'd be there after. And those stories of caring and compassion and friendship, those are the stories that really matter. These are the ways we share the love of God with each other. And it's not just this one story, but if you look in your own congregations, there's thousands of them, of people who felt cared for during some of the worst times in their lives by their congregation. So we're going to talk about all of that today and talking about capturing these stories. But the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about storytelling. And I do want to make one more point before we move on into that. You should not wait for your church to be perfect before you support your church. That's not your call. What I learned during this time was that you can hold your grief for what used to be and your love for what is available now and what the church is now at the same time. Stop waiting for your church to be perfect before you support them. And I think that was the biggest lesson to me that came out of it. There is no perfect church. It's important that you are called to be somewhere and called to be in a community of believers. But don't look for a perfect church. It's not out there. Of course, you're welcome to leave, in the comments if you believe your church is perfect. Please tell me the name. I'd like to look them up. So this story is that I have told you today it's storytelling. It has all the essential elements of a story. So we're going to go over what those elements are today. There is exposition. This is when the reader is introduced to the story. This rising action, this is when the conflict begins to ramp up. The climax of the story is when this main character has to face the truth or make some kind of important choice. The falling action is what happens as a result of the protagonist's decision and the resolution of a narrative arc. And it isn't always happy, but it closes the loop. I don't know about you, but I love stories with a happy ending and everything's all tied up neat. We don't get them too much these days. I don't know about you, but things are a little shaky out there. And I think those sort of uplifting, happy stories are really a ministry these days. And they are things that you and your church can share. A really great way to learn some more about storytelling, you'll see on the next slide, is to listen to stories. Well, we also have the story arc. Pardon me, I forgot about this part. But this is the same thing, just illustrated in a graphic. So next slide. There we go. A great way to learn a lot more about storytelling and also a very pleasant way to pass an hour is to listen to stories from the Moth. It's regularly broadcast now on NPR. We have a Moth Story Slam here in Louisville that I've been to. I love it. You basically can sign up to tell a story and they will pick, I think they just pick names out of a hat, so to speak. And you come up and you tell your story. And the idea is that it's a really compelling story, but it's short. Moth Story Slams usually have a theme. So in February, you might have a theme of heartbreak or true love or something like that. So listening to Moth Story Slams on NPR, I mean, the stories you hear are pretty amazing. And when the stories are really, really good, and you're listening to them in your kitchen, maybe as you cook dinner, you'll find yourself turning up the volume and shushing anybody who walks in the kitchen. You want to know what happened. You don't just want to know, you need to know. And NPR has referred to these compelling stories as driveway moments. You're sitting in your driveway, you're in your car, maybe even with a car full of groceries on a hot day, and you cannot bring yourself to cut off the car and take the groceries in because you have to hear the ending. I do a lot of audiobooks, and sometimes I have these moments. I try to remind myself it's on my phone. I can just take it with me and keep listening. I don't need to sit here in my car. The Moth has some great tips for storytelling on their website for would-be storytellers. You might think of these as you go through your next season of storytelling in your church. Uh, you can't necessarily apply all of these to a church setting, but I think they can be helpful. In the case of the Moth, we're talking about spoken stories. So think of the comparison there would be comparing it to the stewardship moments from the pulpit. So Moth stories are told, not read. What they really love is how the storyteller connects with the audience when there's no page in between them. You want to have some stakes. Stakes are essential in live storytelling. What do you stand to gain or lose? Why is what happens in the story important to you? Why does it matter? Have a great first line that sets up the stakes and grabs attention. Here's a good example. This is not from my own life. The mountain loomed before me. I had my hunting knife, some trail mix, and snow boots. I had to make it to the little cabin and start a fire before sundown or freeze to death for sure. Even just hearing that little bit, I kind of want to know what happened. Know your story well enough so that you can have fun. Make an outline, memorize some bullet points, play with the details, enjoy yourself. Imagine you're at a dinner party, not a deposition. I think that's a really great point because a lot of times when we ask people, would you share your stewardship story with the congregation? So a lot of folks that are really not excited or even just have a lot of anxiety around public speaking. But you have to remember you're among friends. This congregation loves you, supports you, and you are there to say thank you. And you don't have to get it perfect for it to be effective. And in fact, some of the best storytelling and stewardship moments have been ones that where the person has been a little bit nervous. It seems very sincere, very transparent, very real when that happens. I do think it's a really tall order to ask people to talk without notes. In fact, I'm using some notes today. So that one may or may not be something that you want to subscribe to. And also, one more thing, don't assume that everybody knows everyone else's stories. If you find great stories to tell, the best result you can have is, I didn't know that. I didn't know that happened to you. Or I'm so glad to hear that the church has been there for you. I'm so happy to hear that. I think that one of the things that we assume in the church is that we all know each other, and we do. But I will tell you, I've been going to my church more than 20 years, and there's still people I look at and I think, I'm not sure of their name. Or I want to introduce myself to someone, but I stop myself because I think, well, what if they've been going here 40 years? We don't necessarily know each other and know each other's stories as well as we might think. So don't hesitate to ask someone who you think everybody knows to give a stewardship moment. So why do these stories matter? Because they motivate generosity. There's lessons that you can borrow from the nonprofit world. The nonprofit world is largely your competition for stewardship dollars. These days, people, they don't necessarily feel, particularly younger generations, don't feel an obligation to support the church. You're one of many nonprofit organizations that they are supporting. You've got some stuff they don't, though, and they're really big. Unprecedented time with donors. If you think about it, you get an hour a week. Okay, maybe it's not every week, but you get a fair amount of time with the people in the pews, and you get some time to share messages of hope and good stewardship with them every week. You also have theology on your side. That I won't get into. I'm not a theologian. I'm going to leave that up to those with seminary training. I'm sure that Ellie's going to have some things to say about that, which is great. It's not my territory. Some key questions you want to answer with the stories you tell. What would be missing from your community if your church closed tomorrow? If you're talking about a person, for a member of your congregation, what would be missing from your life if your church closed tomorrow? How would things be different? So when you start to think about that, you can start to think about your church as a larger organization rather than just, 1 hour of worship a week. Next slide. So one of the things that I want to talk about some and tease out are groups and silos. Every church has silos. And sometimes the folks in these silos don't interact as much as you might hope. So, for example, I had all of my three daughters are now in college. They were very active participants in the youth program before that, the children's program. So I could tell you when my children were in choir, I could tell you everything that the children's choir was doing. When they were in the youth, I could tell you everything about that. I could not tell you anymore what was going on in the children's program, but I was always happy to find it out. I also find too that folks in the choir may not necessarily know what's going on in the youth program unless they have some youth there. So you need to share across all of those groups. And then there's some even more segmented groups, and we'll talk about that some. Your church is a whole lot more than just 1 hour a week Sunday worship. I know that all of you know this, but as you're thinking about stories, think about what happens on your church property the whole week. That's at least a starting point. You can think about AA groups that meet in your property, and maybe some other community groups that use it. And there's also groups within your own churches. So you might have things like a men's fellowship or Presbyterian women or a knitting group or card games, yoga, an older adults group, children's choir parents. And the other thing to remember too about youth and children's choir parents, at least in my church, they're really busy. And I know I was when my children were in elementary and middle and high school. The stewardship messages kind of have to be shared in different ways because I may or may not catch your weekly email. I may or may not be in worship. I've got a lot going on. So you need to share it across multiple ways. I would also encourage you to use volunteers rather than staff to carry this water. You want your volunteers to be the ones sharing these stories. So when storytelling for stewardship is effective, it's the right person saying the right thing to the right group. And I'm going to extrapolate on that a little bit. So you have your silo. And so you think about, okay, this person is a member of the choir, and that is the primary way they are involved in the church. And then you also have your vision and theme for stewardship. It could be that's your church's overall mission statement. It could be that it is a theme for your stewardship program in that particular year. So your sweet spot for the storytelling is the right person sharing the right story to the right group. So one year when I was chairing stewardship, we asked a wonderful woman with a beautiful English accent, because Americans were suckers for an English accent. We asked her to share the next time she was at choir, if there was a time that she could share with them that she was on the stewardship committee and that she was planning on pledging, and she was inviting them to do so too. And she did. And I, as a youth parent, went to the other youth parents on a Sunday night when the youth were meeting. I had some time with the parents, and I shared with them that I was on stewardship and that I would really love for them to pledge as well. And I took the pledge cards with me because I know with busy parents, if you can get them to make a commitment right then and there, great. No pressure, but I've got them if you want them. And that was effective. So I want to talk a little bit too about how you reach people. The way that we have this as well. I think I've covered this. So let's go on to the next one. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. When we talk about how to share the stories, we've talked quite a bit about sharing from the pulpit, but also think about ways to share so that the person doesn't have to be in church on that particular Sunday to get that message. So share it in your, if you have a newsletter, share it there. If you use social media, which I hope you do, share it there. Just continue to think about all the different channels you have. And don't worry about repeating the message too much because it's a very rare person that's going to see it across all of those and think, my gosh, I've seen this too many times. That's unusual. I mean, think about how many times somebody said, I didn't know about this. And you're like, it was in the bulletin. We put it in the newsletter. We emailed you. I talked to you about it on Sunday. You really have to repeat things for people to get it. There's a wise pastor who was an associate at Highland. His name is Matt Nickel, if you happen to know him. What he always told me he did with announcements and items was he took the longest version, and that was for the newsletter. He shortened it for the bulletin. He shortened it again for Facebook, and then he shortened it down again for a tweet. These days, that might be Blue Sky or something like that. What you're doing with these stories is you're asking people to join you. It's invitational, and that's what you're looking to do. So now I'm gonna show you a couple of examples of stories from churches. These are ones I've collected over the years that I've really liked. And so this first church story is from Forest Hills Presbyterian Church in Cleveland. Hi, Forest Hills, if you're out there. This story is a few years old. But what I liked about it was the story of LaDon Hedden, who came to the church, and then his family came along with him. Has a nice photo of him, and I like the way this story is presented because it tells you all about their children and what really matters to him about the church, and I really like that. It's a very simple story, but I think it's very effective. And then the next story, I really like this one because it is going a little bit outside the box to tell the story of someone who has been helped by the church without identifying that person. So let's go to the next slide. So this is about guests who have received items from the food pantry, and they anonymize the people who have received the gifts, the food and things from the Abundance Food Pantry. I love this because I think this is a wonderful way for the folks, the members of your church, to see how their community efforts have really had an impact. Because I am running just a little bit behind, I'm going to go ahead and skip to the next church. This is First Presbyterian of Delray Beach, Florida. I really like this one because the next story here is about a woman who is 95 and in the church. How often do we overlook the older saints of our congregations? And not everybody knows their story and how they came there. I thought it was a really interesting read, and I don't even know her. And the next one is about a young woman who came to the church. What I really love about this one is she is admittedly an introvert. I think she had a really hard time probably sharing her story, but she did because she loved the church, and that's what motivates people to share. So I do have a few more slides. However, I do think I'm running a little bit over on time, and I don't want to trounce on somebody else's time. But the final point that I was going to make is that another way that you can tell stories is through numbers. So think about doing some work around gathering numbers of impact. So let's say you have a food pantry. How much food did you collect for the year? How much did you? It could be pounds or it could be items. And there's just all kinds of things. How many AA groups meet in your church through the week? Our church at one time hosted some really large AA groups, some of the largest in the city. What are some ways you're maybe making an impact that you may not realize? One church that was a small church that kind of felt a little down on their luck, as a lot of churches are feeling these days. Things aren't what they used to be, and that's okay. But what they did that was really impactful was they did an audit of volunteer hours of their entire congregation. So they asked everybody to keep track for a month of how many hours they volunteered anywhere in the community. And they tallied those up, and they realized that their church was having a tremendous impact that they had not realized, and it made them feel better about who they were and what they were doing. So it's a little note of hope. That is my presentation. I'm really happy to take questions and the question and answer time after Ellie's presentation. But feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk more about this. I love to talk about this stuff, and I'll be glad to talk to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Robyn. I look forward to the Q&A period after Ellie's presentation. A reminder that the slides and a recording of today will be sent to all of our registrants at some point early next week. Next up, we have the Reverend Ellie Johns Kelly, who serves as a ministry relations officer in the Northeast. Ellie has served as pastor in a number of churches in different contexts, and she has now served at the foundation for many years. She's an amazing resource, and I'm grateful we all get to learn from her today. Another reminder that following Ellie's presentation, there will be a time for Q&A with both Robyn and Ellie for 15 minutes. If you have questions that you'd like addressed in the Q&A, please be sure and put them in the Q&A section, not in the chat. Ellie, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joseph. It is great to be with all of you here today. As Joseph pointed out, I've been with the foundation for quite some time, 11 years now, covering now the Allegheny and Chesapeake area, but have once even gone clear up to the Synod of the Northeast. And I love talking stewardship and plan giving, as do my 10 other colleagues. And we are always glad to be of service to you, to really enable you to tell your story well. So thanks for joining us today for Stewardship as Story. As we head off, I really want you to think about theology of stewardship and how you think of a theology of stewardship. There's a great new book out by Karl Travis called God's Gift of Generosity that I highly commend to you. I've been waiting for it for years, and it finally came out this last year. And it's probably, I would say, one of the best, or is the best, theology of stewardship that really gives you a core grounding as you think about and frame stewardship for yourself and others in your faith community. As you think about that, consider your earliest memory of stewardship. You could jot that down right now or come back and reflect on it later. Consider it with other folks serving on the session with you. What is your earliest memory of stewardship? Who taught you about stewardship? Was it a Sunday school teacher, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor? What does this word stewardship evoke in you? How about that word generosity? Does that communicate something different for you? Are they positive or negative? For many of us, stewardship is a great joy, and we reflect on God's generosity and all we have and the ways we are invited to participate in stewardship. But for some of us, it can carry a negative connotation too. I think of a story about my dad growing up. He grew up at Fremont Avenue Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was an only child, and he and his mom and dad never missed church, but one Sunday a year. They would take a drive to Bedford, PA to see the leaves at their peak, which happened to coordinate with the annual one-time stewardship sermon. And Granddad did not want to hear the minister talk about money. Unfortunately, this colored my dad's view of stewardship. He served in ministry for 55 years up until his death. But for, I would say, the first 45 years of ministry, he always saw stewardship as something he had to do, something he dreaded. It was that 1 year obligatory sermon, and he hated doing it because it really felt like he was putting a hardcore press on folks, that it was all about the money. And he was afraid that he would harm or put a misunderstanding in the hearts of those who are living on the margins, those who are just making ends meet, that they might forego some of their medicine or not adequately feed their kids because they had to give to the church. It was such a shame that that colored so much of the way he engaged in stewardship. Do you know that old hymn, I love to tell this story? I'm going to sing it for you now. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longing as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story, 'twill be my theme in glory, to tell the old story of Jesus and his love. You know, my dad was always telling the story of Jesus and his love. You know, storytelling, the Bible is made up of stories. And my dad was a great preacher, a good teacher, and really great at pastoral care. He was already telling the story. But for him, stewardship was isolated. It wasn't part of that. And if only I could have gotten to him earlier, learned a little bit earlier in my days to share that idea with him, then stewardship wouldn't have been a burden. You know, stewardship shouldn't be just a once a year event where you have one or maybe 2 or 3 sermons all held up at that time of the appeal. Stewardship is something we should be doing year round. I encourage preachers to preach on it at least once a month. It doesn't have to be the main focus, but continue to weave it into your sermon, talking about the mission and ministry that your congregation is a part of, inviting folks to be a part of it with their time, talent, and resource. When we reframe stewardship to be about storytelling, then it is not a burden, something we have to do. It's not this terrible obligation, but it's about living into what we're doing. You know, theologian Harvey Cox said, all human beings have an innate need to hear and tell stories and to have a story to live by. Roger Schenck, a cognitive psychologist, says, humans are not ideally set up to understand logic. They are ideally set up to understand stories. And if you wish to influence an individual or a group, this is Annette Simmons. If you wish to influence an individual or group to embrace a particular value in their daily lives, tell them a compelling story. Think about the many ways you tell your story year round. When it's appeal time, don't use a one-size-fits-all letter for everyone. Have 4 different letters, either based on generation, because we know different stories motivate us where we are, or by our level of engagement in the church. You can find great resources on our website or reach out to your MRO to get samples of how to do that. But think of the many ways you tell your story throughout the year. Frame and reframe generosity through story. We're already doing ministry. We just need to reframe our conversations about money to be about the ministry impact and not about the expenditure. We need to celebrate our ministries. We need to connect money to ministry. That's what it's really about. Now, as you're doing this, if we really want to nurture a culture of generosity, we need to be able to articulate our mission and vision well so that people will want to be a part of what we're doing, sharing their time, their talent, and their resource, really being fully engaged. We need to be able to articulate our mission and vision so as a session, we can make decisions that are in accord with that, but also so that people can understand who we are and what it is we're trying to do. Your mission statement is really a way of articulating the purpose of your congregation. Your vision is out there. How will the future look if the mission is achieved? It's your roadmap for the congregation, but even more specifically, it is a roadmap for the session. And if you want generosity to exist, like I said, you have to have a clear mission and vision, and it's got to be owned by the congregation. Let the mission build the budget and inspire support. You'll see I have a link here. It will take you to the Church Financial Leadership Academy where you can create a username and password. If you haven't already, use the code PCUSA. But there are videos kind of like Netflix or little TED Talks on financial leadership. Specifically, there's this great video, Mission and Vision Comes Before Money. So register, log in, look for that video, and that's something you can share with your session as you think about how do we hone that. Also, feel free to reach out to your MRO. Me, if you're in Allegheny and Chesapeake region, or one of the other 10, find your MRO and know we're happy to help you think through this and unpack it as well. Now, as we think about the fundraising landscape, as we think about resources for mission and ministry, we know through Giving USA that has been studying American philanthropy for the last 69 years that they just dropped their 2025 report on 2024. So we just have it fresh off the press, right? We know that Americans gave $592.5 billion to charity last year. Of that, religious institutions received the largest portion of the pie at 23%. Now, it's not what it was last year at 24. It's dropped a bit. And it's certainly not what it was 30 years ago at 50%. We're all competing for that almighty charitable dollar. And there are more than 1.5 million charities in this country. We know that, the largest portion of the pie, 23% last year, went to religious institutions. The next largest two sectors are human services at 14% with $91.5 billion and education at 14% with $88.32 billion. That's a lot of money, right? But we want people to really put our church as their number one charity, the one that they're going to support, because this is the place where they orient their lives, where they find community, where they are reminded of God's grace and are able to share that good news with others. There is that increased competition for that charitable dollar. And we hope that our church will be the number one nonprofit to receive that in people's lives. We want people to give because they really believe in what we're doing. We don't want them to give out of obligation. As Bill Enright says, they'll give just enough to be satisfied with their guilt. We want them to give because they believe in what we're doing. And if we have clear mission and vision and we're telling our story well, then we can achieve that. We can encourage them. We know that the top 3 things that impact a donor contributing their support is they believe that we're making an impact, there's financial stability, and they believe in the leadership. But we have to tell the story well so people know it, right? We know that stewardship is about gratitude, spiritual practice, about making choices, about caring for all that God has given us, right? It's about time, talent, treasure, and even our influence. So I was at a church in Latrobe preaching, and I like to talk about the three-legged stool of time, talent, and resource, and having people commit their gifts at personally meaningful levels, knowing that, like my fingers, they're all different lengths. At any point in time, we might have different gifts, right? But I had a woman stop me after the service and say, Ellie, three-legged stools aren't so sturdy. My daughter fell off of her stool in her res hall and got a concussion last week. And I said, well, it's no longer Trinitarian, but I'll give you a fourth leg to the stool. That's your influence. We want people to use their time, talent, resources, and their influence at personally meaningful levels because they believe in what we are doing. They want to be fully engaged in this ministry. Stewardship's also about discipleship making, right? Things it's not about a once-a-year event. If you only preach about stewardship once, people are going to get dollar signs in their eyes. It makes it all about the money. It's not about the money. It's about the ministry, right? Stewardship's also not about meeting a budget, and it's not about us. It's not about the church. It's about responding to God's grace and generosity, being a part of it, sharing it with others. So, pastors, those of you who are out there, whether you're a minister of word and sacrament, a commission, ruling elders, you're serving maybe a new worshiping community, it is so key for you to talk about your own stewardship. There's a book by Anthony Robinson on vital stewardship, I believe it is. He talks about that a lot. Karl Travis talks about it. It's not about puffing yourself up. It is about sharing your story, what compels you. You know, when I was a kiddo, even though my dad was not very good about and hated preaching stewardship, he did instill in us the importance of it. And when I was a little girl, I could not understand why our family had to give to the church. It just didn't make sense. If the church is paying my dad to do this work, why do we have to give it back to the church? And around the dinner table, what my mom and dad shared was, it's because we are part of this community of faith. We believe in what the church is doing. We're not paying your dad's salary. We are supporting the broader mission and ministry. So if you're a pastor and you're not supporting your church currently, I encourage you to do so. Do it at a personally meaningful level. Figure out what you can do now, but be a part of it. And don't be afraid to lift up why it is that you believe this ministry is worth sharing, not just your expertise and getting a salary, but investing in it as well. Preach about generosity regularly. Like I said, once a month. Weave it in, just have it be a natural part. It doesn't have to be the core focus, but clearly spell it out for your folks. And sometimes you have to, right? I was at a church in the eastern part of Pennsylvania earlier this spring, and the folks said, oh, our pastor only doesn't preach on stewardship. And she said, what? I do it all the time. I'm always weaving it in. Sometimes we may need to be a little more explicit, but definitely weave it in and help people see how the ministry they're doing or the ways they're contributing is making an impact in this ministry. Pastors, you're one of the storytellers. You're not the only one, but you're one of the storytellers. So claim that. Be part of the invite and ask, as well as someone who says thank you. Knowing how to engage your folks and share your gratitude for the way they're investing their time, talent, and resource makes a difference. Can you write a couple thank you notes a week? you're serving a small congregation, it may only be one thank you note a week or one thank you note every other week. Others, if you're serving larger congregations, it may be a few thank you notes a week, but it's not something small that you can put on your agenda and think about. I want you, those of you serving on stewardship committees, to think about how do you call on your storytellers, your elders, your people in the pews, the pastor or pastors, your mission partners. Who are you supporting? Those are folks who, today after COVID, we're used to doing little videos. Maybe they can't be there in person. If they can, that's great. But they can share something that you can put on your social media. They can share a video that you put up during worship, maybe at the time of offering, to talk about how when people invest in the ministry of this church, it has far-reaching impact, right? Encourage these folks, your elders, your people in the pews, the pastor, the mission partners, to share personal stories as to a time in their lives when God showed up through the giving and generosity of others. Sometimes it's not just sharing how we seek to be generous, but how when we experience generosity, that can be so powerful. I also want you to focus on mission and ministry in your congregation. Tell the story of that mission via a story that changed a life, right? So how do we tell our story? Through preaching, through minutes for mission, during, before, or after an offering. In social media is a great place. Whether, as Robyn said, you're using Blue Sky, some folks are using Instagram, Facebook. Think about all the different ways. Can you tell a little story? And it may be, like she said, just using those numbers, putting that up there, right? Your newsletters or e-newsletters, brochures, town hall meetings. Maybe at the beginning of the year, you do a visioning Sunday, or maybe the session's been working the first 6 months of the year. And maybe you launch your visioning Sunday in June or July, right? We're into July now. But 6 months later, give an update. How are we coming along? What else is the session thinking about that we're trying to do? What are areas of ministry the session is dreaming of, but aren't yet funded? Never talk scarcity, right? In your storytelling, cast vision. What does the session believe God's calling them to do? And talk about the ministry yet to be funded. Do a dessert and dialogue. It's a great choice too. How about Sunday school? Think about how you weave that in. There's a great resource, and it's escaping me now. I can look it up if you email me through the PCUSA, a new series they've done that includes gratitude and generosity, and I'm happy to grab that for you. And think about testimonials, whether they're video testimonials, or you may have folks who are not comfortable talking, but you could do a little testimonial during the offering time, make it a little more interesting. And maybe they don't like to talk, but put it on one-word cards where they just flip the card, but they can tell the story well, right? Offer a video testimony. Don't just use them in the fall, but is there something that you can use during worship, on your website, social media pages, to really share how the church is living into its mission and ministry and how people are part of that and what joy it gives them, inviting others in. Also think about a narrative budget. This is a great way to show what impact that collective budget, what you're able to do in mission and ministry as people invest their dollars and their time and talent to make it possible. So we have a lot of great resources for you at the foundation that are free. I talked about the Church Financial Leadership Academy earlier. Another great one is stewardshipnavigator.com. If you have not signed up for either of these yet, do so now. It doesn't cost anything. This is our resource for you. The key is signing up, and you can have as many people as you like sign up from your church. There's no limit. The key is everyone signing in with their own personal username and login. And these two programs run parallel to one another, these platforms. They don't talk to each other, so you can use the same username and password. We're not going to know, but if that makes it easier for you, but you do want each individual person to use it. But on Stewardship Navigator, you'll find there wonderful resources for thinking about how do you tell your story year round. There's an annual calendar or a calendar that takes you bi-monthly through things that you can do as individuals or collectively as a committee. But there's also a narrative budget template that I encourage you to check out. Might make it easy for you, but great free resources that we developed, I want to say 6 and 5 or 4 and 5 years ago. But great resources available to you at no cost to help you. So as you think about a narrative budget, I actually recommend that, if you're doing, you present your budget to the congregation, you remember you don't, when you present your budget, session approves the budget, a congregation just receives it, right? I recommend it. Folks present their budget in narrative form because most folks in the pews don't get into all the nitty-gritty detail of the numbers. Now, you want to have a small stack of the line item budget available for those who just love numbers. You're not trying to hide anything, but you really want to use a narrative budget to tell the story, to inspire folks. And this church, Clinton Presbyterian Church in New Jersey, I've been watching them for years. I used to work with them, and they do such a great job with narrative budgets. This 2025 theme was where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Think about being rich in a whole different framework. It's not about the money, but how are we rich in spirit? And how is this congregation really living in? You see, they tell their story well, and they help people see how sharing their time, talent, and resource and influence, being fully engaged, what impact it is making within the congregation, regionally and globally, as they seek to live into God's mission in the world, right? And so just a great way to get people thinking about, and you can use this during your appeal time as well. But I highly recommend, even if you tried it once before, try it again and do it well. Help people see what it takes to engage in this ministry and what it is your session is, the vision that you're seeking to cast, how you live into that together. So, when we think about that line item budget, it's a budgeting tool. It's an accounting tool. It's really meant ideally for the session. It's the tool they need. It doesn't show how money is invested. It doesn't show how volunteer time and talents are impacting the church, but that narrative budget, it really is your visioning tool. It shows the programs of the church having a positive impact. It inspires and helps us to see how our gifts are really making a difference. And it helps us reframe the finances aren't about money. They're about mission and ministry. And how are we engaging in that in faithful ways as we seek to communicate God's grace, love, and reconciliation for the world. Now, as you're thinking about putting together a narrative budget, you can think of what are your ministry areas? Usually helpful to have 3 to 5. Think about how you allocate your staff time to each area. When I served the First Presbyterian Church of Warren, I did a narrative budget there. And I always recommend, if you're using a pie graph, we did 5 areas: worship, mission, Christian ed, pastoral care and fellowship is how we tried to tell our story in those areas. You see, we don't have building in there. Building is just a tool for mission and ministry. So we're focusing on the missions and the ministry, right? But some of it's a bit of a guesstimate. But I said to our property manager and custodian, I said to those two guys, so help me think through how much of your time goes in each of these areas. And they said, Ellie, we don't do pastoral care. And I said, oh, but you clean my office so it's ready for pastoral care. And back in the day, before streaming, that's how long ago I was serving this church, we would record the service. And while these fellows cleaned the parlor on Monday morning, they were running CDs, burning CDs in the computer lab with that service that our deacons could take it out to our folks who weren't able to get to church, right? So it was a small percentage of their time, but you allocate each staff person total pay and package, taxes, FICA even, as a percentage to each of those areas, right? And so you think about how you're using your church building, and you do that too. How many hours in a given week? What percentage is it used for worship or worship preparation? And I don't know about you, but I served a congregation that 25% of our population was 85 to 101. I did a lot of funerals. That was part of thinking about time. How many funerals a month did we do? That was part of worship, right? So you think that through, and then you're able to allocate, your total building and grounds to those areas of way the building is being used. I encourage you to think about volunteer hours it takes. Even include your ushers. That's volunteer time, right? As people are practicing bells or singing, that's volunteer time. Mission is clearly volunteer time. Think that through. Add that in. It really can be compelling. And then tell those stories of success over the past year in each area. Really compelling stories that folks will go, yeah, this does fit our mission and vision. We are living into this. So think of using this. And again, there's a great template at stewardshipnavigator.com to help you do that. Earlier, I talked about that three-legged stool, right? This one, the legs are all the same this length, right? But for most of us, we might not be able to give as much time as talent or resource, or maybe not as much resource or talent or time. But you want to engage all three. If you take one of them away, or all four with your influence, if you take the three-legged stool, take one away, your stool falls over, right? Three, it might be cattywampus, but it stands. We want people to engage their time, talent, resources, and influence, each at a personally meaningful level. Not all equal, but all personally meaningful, right? And remember, it's not an either or, but an and. Time, talent, resource, and influence, right? More than anything, I want you to focus on how you say thank you and use that as a means of storytelling. Think about, do you send out a summary of gifts once a year? Maybe it's semi-annually, twice a year. I'd really encourage quarterly. And do you send it out with just a letter stating, this is your giving to date? Or do you include a gift letter that really tells the story of what's been happening in this last quarter? Reach out to us, your particular MRO, and we can give you samples, right? There are some great ones out there. The church where I worship, First Pres Morgantown, they had done just this is your giving. And I encourage them to put in a letter and tell a story. And they did just as Robyn suggested. They put in numbers, right? So you can put them collectively in that quarterly letter. What have we been able to do? And then you can just post those individually in your social media as a way of telling the story. But say thank you. The model I have talks about what's happened in the last quarter. It's from First Pres Brooklyn. It's a great model. And former pastor there, Reverend Dr. Adrian Thorne, is now at Riverside in New York City. And she said, Ellie, I just took some models from some other churches, and they were large, even evangelical churches, but they told the story well. And what I love is in the sample letter I have from her, it talks about what's happened in the last quarter. It notes that included is their giving statement to date. If they are behind where they'd like to be, simply and can bring it up to date. Church is always glad to receive it. If they're not able to do what they had intended, we understand. Simply let the session or the stewardship committee know. Life changes, that happens. But the language I love so much, it says, if you're in a season of fruitfulness, we could find ways to put your additional gifts to work. We can really make a difference with that. And honestly, I had preached there and given just a small offering. And because I'd given an offering that year, I got that letter. It was so inspiring. I made another gift. So, think about doing that. I already noted that it's helpful for pastors to write thank you notes, personalized letter. Think about 1 to 10 notes a week, depending on the size of your congregation. The session, I think that every moderator should come into a session meeting and have 1 to 2 note cards for every elder to write a thank you note. Now, you don't need to know how much folks gave. Now, I think this is a whole other matter. The pastor and at least 2 to 3 elders do need to know giving patterns, right? Does the whole session? No. But the whole session can write thank you notes. So you have a running list of those who have given and contributed to the church. And you ask each elder to write 1 or 2 thank you notes. That session meeting. It's easy. If they have terrible handwriting, or maybe it's because it's always been bad, or they have terrible arthritis. Either way, they can take it home. If they still have a typewriter, they could type it. If they want to write it on their computer and print it out and stuff it into that note card, they can do it too. But you want a personal letter. You don't want dear sister and brother in Christ. No, you want your elders to write, dear Don and Beulah, dear Zach. Make it personal. The pastor can feed a little vignette, a sentence or 2 to put in that little thank you note, if that helps some elders, right? But you thank folks for their dedication and support of this ministry. Maybe you use your mission statement as a little tagline in there too, and how their investment in the church helps make this possible. And then you sign it with your own name, whether you want to write yours in Christ, peace be with you, with gratitude, whatever you're writing, sign your own name. In my home presbytery, they got into writing thank you notes in our mission committee, and I was so grateful to get one. But when I got my card, it said yours in Christ, the mission committee. It is so much more personal if we have a name on there, So if it's Carol from the mission committee, or Fred, or whomever, Jerome, having that makes a difference. So have your session write thank you notes. Have your generosity team, maybe you call it a stewardship team or a committee, have them write thank you notes. Maybe when those pledges come in, you're writing a thank you note then, but you want to be sure that your folks are getting at least 1 thank you note a year, but ideally 2 or 3. The more we say thank you and are able to help people see how their gifts make a difference, they're going to feel that's important. There was a small little church I worshiped at when I first moved into the area 9 years ago. And I wasn't preaching that Sunday, but I was one of those strange ranger Gen Xers that I still had a checkbook, and I wrote a check for the offering. And I got a thank you note from the session, the clerk of session. And this was a church that was worshiping 25 folks. But they noticed that one time, that first gift, and they sent me a thank you note. So, pay attention. Do we have first-time givers or folks who haven't been contributing in a long time, and all of a sudden they're a part of it? That's another good time to write a thank you note. Also, think about phone calls, reaching out and just saying, we're grateful for you being connected to the church, for the time you're putting into it, the ways you're engaging, whether it's teaching, ushering, going out serving in-home communion with the pastor, whatever it might be. Those phone calls make a difference too. Think about an annual celebration to thank folks for their support of the ministry. And then I know Sandra and Karl are going to talk about planned giving, but think about hosting a legacy society event where you thank those who've made the decision to include the church in their will or estate plans at the end of life. You're not celebrating that the gifts have come in, you're celebrating that decision. And what a great opportunity that is as well. Keys to being successful in your storytelling and as you nurture generosity is to be prayerful, to celebrate your church, be visionary, communicate. Think of all the different ways to communicate because one size doesn't fit all, right? Involve many. Recruit the storytellers. And if you're putting together a generosity team or stewardship committee, get storytellers on that. Folks who maybe represent different facets of the church, the silos that Robyn talked about, or the different committees you have. Really get folks who are good storytellers on your generosity team. Like I said, tell lots of stories. One size doesn't fit all. Remember, you are funding ministry. You're not raising funds. You're funding ministry that you believe God is calling you to carry out as a community of faith together. And more than anything, be inviting, never threaten. Like I said, if people give out of obligation, as Bill Enright says, they're going to give just enough to be satisfied with their guilt. We want them to contribute because they believe in what we're doing. We want this to be a joyful experience. One where we can say, yeah, I'm really glad to be part of this community of faith. And it affects my spiritual practices, my engagement. It makes me whole, right? Here are some resources we have for you. I know that Robyn highlighted how to tell the story, the Central Guide of Storytelling for Moth. It's just a second place to poke that in for you. But great resource to think about how do you tell stories. Not Your Parents' Offering Plate by Cliff Christopher. The Perfect Story, How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire by Karen Ebner. Embracing Stewardship is a great stewardship book by Charles Chicky Lane and Grace Duddy Pomeroy, Good Lutherans. We've had both Chicky and Grace at Stewardship Kaleidoscope, but also years back in San Diego, we had Eric Law with us for his Holy Currencies. He has a number of other books. Check those out. Scott McKenzie and Christine Miller's Bounty is a good one. Spirituality of Fundraising. This is a really small but great book for sessions to read, to wrap their head around why we are investing in ministry and inviting people to be a part of it. And then, of course, Karl Travis's God's Gift of Generosity, Gratitude Beyond Stewardship. I highly commend these to you. And I had thought I had, I have, it's not in the list, but you see it up on the page. Bill Enright's Kitchen Table Giving. You can get it through Amazon. It's just a great short read. And these books, you can read with your session or have folks read independently. The green screen isn't working well for me there, friends. But they're not very thick, and they're great resources for how to make it a conversation piece and unpack it. Maybe you read a chapter a month, but good resources. This came out a few years ago. Kitchen Table Giving and God's Gift of Generosity, again, just came out last year. But these are my two go-to books that I recommend to pastors these days. And then, of course, our Stewardship Navigator and the Church Financial Leadership Academy. thank you so much for your time today. Know that ministry relations officers across the country are here to serve you, and we are really honored to walk alongside you and help you be better storytellers to inspire folks to support your mission in ministry. Thanks so much, Joseph.
Ellie, thank you so much. Such a gift to the church and the broader conversation around storytelling and stewardship. I hope people heard some helpful tips. And as we enter into about 15 minutes of Q&A, I've been collecting some questions that people have been messaging me. There were several questions that were addressed in both the chat and in the Q&A, but I've tried to pull out some that might be more helpful for the broader group. So at the risk of blowing up the Q&A time, Ellie, those of us engaged in conversations around why we argue as a best practice the pastor should know who gives and giving patterns and all of that information. There have been several questions that have come in. So Ellie, I'm going to challenge you in a minute or less.
You know that's tough for me. Okay.
It's tough for you in the best of times,
know?
especially with this question. Someone asked, how does a pastor write a personal thank you if your church does not share with the pastor who's giving or pledging?
Indeed, it's really hard. And I would say that I was convinced when I was at a Stewardship Kaleidoscope, a Stewardship Kaleidoscope conference while I was serving a church in Warren, Pennsylvania, First Presbyterian Church of Warren, that it was clergy malpractice for me not to know. I'd always kind of followed my dad's lead that I choose not to know. But when you don't know, then you're guessing. And, if you have a propensity to treat people differently, you're doing that on a guess rather than on actual data. That's more dangerous. But truth be told, we as pastors here handle confidential information every day, right? I knew who had cancer. I knew who had AIDS. I knew who had infidelities in their marriage. I knew who had gotten in trouble in the law, their kids. I could walk into a hospital room and Mrs. N said, "Reverend Johns, look at my incision." And she lifts up her gown after a hip replacement. And I say, "You had a great surgeon. Looks like it's going to heal very nicely," right? Did I go and tell people about it? No, I handled it with confidence, and clergy can handle this information with confidence, but we can't say thank you truly if we don't know. So it's important for pastors to know, one, to say thank you, but two, in terms of good long-term planning, if we have disproportional giving going on, the wrong person dies, that can change the reality real swiftly. So, 2 to 3 elders need to know giving patterns and the pastor alongside them, and they can handle it with confidence. We handle confidential information. We can manage it well. So trust that.
Thanks,
Ellie. More than a minute. Sorry, friend.
No, for you, Ellie, that was fantastic. Someone asked if there was a tool to help create a narrative budget. And you directed folks to the Stewardship Navigator, where they'll find a narrative budget generator that's as easy and plug and play as we could make it. Is there anything more that you want to say about that? There were several questions about help.
It's plug and play. Kind of go through it, look at it, try to get your stuff together as you go. But reach out to your ministry relations officer, your MRO. I see there is that question. Your ministry relations officer. Those are your regional reps like me, right? We also have some samples. You can use that template, but I also have just a basic Excel sheet that you can use as a format. But I think that template is so handy. But we also have collections of other churches who have put together narrative budgets without that template, and you can see different flavors. So we have samples we're always glad to share. And, you don't have to create it out of whole cloth. It's great to know there are models out there.
Yeah. Someone else, actually, a handful of folks asked about the Church Financial Leadership Academy. The link is in the chat, and the registration code is, wait for it, PCUSA. So you do need a registration code for the Church Financial Leadership Academy, and it's just PCUSA. Robyn, can you say a little bit more about the invitational nature of stories? What makes a story invitational? And are there ways that stories can be exclusive as opposed to invitational?
Well, that is a wonderful question. So an invitational story is one that allows you to see yourself as someone who relates to that narrative. So it's there might be portions of it, like with the story that I shared with you. There's a lot of people in my congregation who have felt cared for by the church. And even just saying that allow people in the congregation to little light bulb to kind of go on and go, oh yes, that's right. When my mother died last year, the pastor visited me and they did these things and somebody brought me a casserole and you want to use your story to remind people of the ways in which they have also experienced the love of Christ through the church. A story, that's a good question about the exclusivity of a story. I think sometimes stories that maybe talk about or that talk about status, I would think, could be a little challenging. I think you want your experiences to be a little bit more kind of everyday, if that,
Yeah.
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 I would love to know what your input would be on that.
No, I think that's right. You want to tell stories that folks one can relate to, right? And so that doesn't mean that there might be specific things. I mean, you could tell a story about working for a newspaper well, I've never worked for a newspaper, but I've worked somewhere, and you could tell that particular story that is relevant and contextually appropriate for you. You could tell that in a way that avoided insider language, right? That um, sort of highlighted the uniqueness of working in that place, excuse me, but was also broad in the sense that I could connect that to maybe other places I had worked. I think that's an example of that exclusivity versus inclusivity.
Yeah, the insider language is always challenging. We in the Peace USA, we love our acronyms. And like the MRO one that a lot of people pointed out. You're right. That's a barrier to understanding, and we have to be careful about that. So that's a good reminder.
Yeah. Ellie, a question for you that just popped in the Q&A. Is stewardship still the best word to use?
A lot of folks, like I said, some of us hold a connotation for stewardship that isn't always positive. So a lot of churches moved to generosity in the last dozen years or so. And so that might work better for your church, is talking generosity. And you got to figure out what works for your context. Stewardship is so beautiful, particularly as we think about stewardship of the earth. People can relate to that. But you've got to figure out what works for your context. But I would say stewardship or generosity. But generosity really kind of takes you outside the box and helps you think. Either way, it's still about mission and ministry. It's not about money. It's about mission and ministry, and how are we engaging that fully?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I also think there's an idea that generosity is sort of encapsulates a discipleship trait in a way that's certainly more broad than just 3 weeks in the fall each year. Yeah. Maybe a question for both of you. If a church is continually running deficit budgets and a church leader says, our people need to know, how would you encourage telling that particular story?
You want to go first? Or you want me?
I'll let you go first.
Well, I learned this years ago. Don't talk deficits. You don't want to scare off friends, and you don't want to scare off visitors. You got to talk about ministry yet to be funded. So I think that narrative budget is a really useful way to help people see what it takes to engage in this ministry fully. And then talking about ministry yet to be funded. I heard Cliff Christopher years ago talk about, never put the giving in the bulletin of, this is what we need this week and this is what came in. Number one, it doesn't come in evenly every week, right? So you're giving not a faithful representation of what's going on. But you want to encourage a theology of abundance, or even just a theology of God's sufficiency versus a theology of scarcity. So, if you are running those shortfalls, use the narrative budget. If you need to have a clear letter go out, have it go only to members, not in a newsletter article, but a letter to members. But don't talk deficit, talk about ministry yet to be funded. Inspire folks. This is what the session believes God is calling us to do. And talk about what you're trying to turn around, that you want to be a sustainable ministry and you're trying to figure out how to do this, and invite folks as they're able to increase their support of the ministry. Have anything else, Robyn?
No, I can't really improve on that. I think that's a really strong answer. Thank you.
Well, Robyn, maybe a question for you. How do you tell stories that are aspirational but still true?
Well, that's a very good question. Most of the stories that I'm accustomed to telling are things that, are experiences. But I think you could create a narrative in which you say, let's imagine together. And so you might say, if let's say your goal or one of the things your church is dreaming about doing is buying the building next door and turning that into some sort of ministry center. So my church did buy the building next door, and they turned it into a place where there's some youth programming, but we also lease offices to a refugee ministries organization. It also there's all kinds of uses for that building. So ours was, and it was part of a capital campaign, was let's imagine together how that might function in 5 or 10 years. And this is what we aspire to do. This is what we could do. I think you could also build a narrative budget that says this is kind of our reality. With 10% more, we could do this, we could do these things. With 20% more, we could do these amazing things. There was even a great story that Karl Mattison, I remember, told once about a church that asked, in thinking about, I grew up in the Baptist church, so tithing 10% of your income was expected. And we don't use that language or talk about that as much in the Peace USA. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard it. But I remember Karl told a story about a church that actually asked everyone to report in what 10% of their income would be. Not that they had to give it, but just to report in. And then they built a budget as if they had all that money. And it was really amazing what the church could do. And they built this vision, and giving went up because people began to see that aspiration, that inspiration, that dream of what they could be. Now, did everybody give 10% of their income? No, they did not. But they gave more because they began to see that more was possible.
That's great. Ellie, you've got 30 seconds for this one. What are some of the ways that we can tell stories to different generations, or in the 25 seconds you have now, should we tell stories to different generations?
Yes, because what motivates the 80-year-old is different for the 60-year-old sometimes, which is different for the 40-year-old and the 20-year-old. So really think about what the stories are that you have to tell. Tell them often, in many ways, really seeking to engage those folks with what's going to motivate them. You can reach out to your MRO. We have an older piece from Karl Travis that he shared with us years ago on generations. It doesn't have Gen Z in because it's about an 8-year-old piece, but Karl had given it to us that we could share, and it helps you think through, like, what do people think about the institution? What is their experience of stewardship? What motivates them? And when you can think through it in different ways, it can help you think about, well, what kind of story is really going to appeal to that age group? What are they going to resonate with? And I think if you can do that, you're going to be more successful as you tell the stories in different ways to appeal to the different age groups.
Yeah. I want to bring one
Oops. Sorry,
additional
go
thing
ahead.
out if I could. I see Sally Willis Watkins comment in the Q&A. I don't know if you all saw that, but about not emphasizing deficit, but she recently served a church that had been running a $50,000 deficit for years and had kept it from the congregation. There's a balance. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think there does have to be some transparency and honesty around the situation that a church finds itself in. And Sally, I just want to affirm that. I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not easy to talk about, but it's probably necessary at some point.
Yeah. Well, Robyn, Ellie, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thank you all for joining us for session 1 of this day of learning. Friends, welcome back. Welcome back to this, our final session of today. Thank you again on behalf of the Presbyterian Foundation for joining us on this June Day of Learning. Our presenters this afternoon are the Reverend Sandra Moon and Karl Mattison. You are in for a real treat. These are two of the smartest, most interesting people at the foundation. Sandra is a ministry relations officer serving the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rocky Mountains. Karl is a vice president at the foundation with a focus on planned giving. So far today, we've looked at the nuts and bolts of storytelling and how stewardship can be, maybe even should be, an act of telling stories of mission and ministry and how we should invite and could invite other people to participate in that. Now we move to a conversation around how we might leverage storytelling to inspire people to think about how their story might continue after death so that ministry might thrive for future generations. Before they begin, I want to thank our presenters and all the staff at the foundation. Our Zoom webinar has been produced by Nathan Young. Thank you all for making this day of learning possible. Again, all 3 workshops will be recorded with the link sent out on around Tuesday of next week to all of our registrants. And you will be able to share that link with other people who didn't register if they want to watch as well. We've had several questions. You do not have to have registered in order to be able to watch a recording of these webinars. Again, you're encouraged to use the Q&A button to submit any questions you'd like addressed during our Q&A time, which will happen for 15 minutes after Sandra and Karl's hour-long presentation. So please don't hesitate to submit questions, and if we can't get to all of them, we'll do our best to have our presenters submit written responses to the ones we can't get to today. Again, please use the Q&A button, not the chat, to submit questions that you'd like our presenters to address. Thanks again for joining us. Sandra and Karl, the floor is yours.
Give Karl a moment to share his screen. Good morning or good afternoon for some of you all. I was born in Toledo, Ohio, to first-generation Korean American parents. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to share my entire life story, but I did want to share with you a little bit about my maternal grandmother. My grandmother lived in Seoul, South Korea, and came to visit off and on during my childhood. And even though there was a bit of a language barrier between us, I had always felt close to my grandma. When I was in high school, my grandmother got really sick, and my mom brought her to the US so she could take care of her. And she ended up living with us for over 4 years. In my childhood home, we had a 2-story foyer and a landing on our second floor that had excellent natural lighting from our windows and skylights. When I would wake up in the morning, my grandma would already be awake. I'd always find her sitting on that landing, reading the Bible and praying. My grandma would invite me to sit with her, and she would hold my hands as she prayed. And even with our language challenges, I knew she was praying for me and our family. She also loved it when I sat with her as she read aloud from her Korean Bible. She had a red colored pencil that she often handed to me. And in the Korean language, there are characters that have little O's or circles in the letters. And for some reason, she encouraged me to color in those little circles with the red colored pencil. I asked my mom recently why Grandma let me color in her Bible, and she said it was to mark the verses that were important to her. Perhaps it was reading the verses to me that made them important to her. My freshman year in college, my grandmother's health took a turn for the worst, and she asked my mom to accompany her back to Korea so she could die in her own land. During those last weeks that my mom and Grandma had together, even amidst the grief that my mother was feeling as she prepared to say goodbye to her mother, she made sure that my grandma's affairs were in order and that she knew her wishes upon her death. In the spring of 2002, my grandma died with my mom and some of her siblings by her side, and she was buried next to my grandfather. My mom and her siblings each received a small inheritance, and a gift was given to her church in Seoul. My mom knew how much my grandmother loved reading the Bible every day, so the gift to the church was a new set of pew Bibles. Considering that my grandmother attended one of the largest Presbyterian churches, not only in Korea, but in the world, this was a significant gift, and it honored my grandma's love of Scripture. My mom also inherited the most precious item that my grandma owned, her Bible, with all the colored-in circles that represented the verses that she loved and read to me. In life and death, we belong to God, and I'm so grateful for my grandmother's legacy in the life of my family, for her church, and for my own faith journey. Again, my name is Sandra Moon. I'm the Ministry Relations Officer for the Northwest region, and I previously served the Cumberland region. And I'm joined today by my delightful colleague, Karl Mattison, Vice President of Plan Giving Resources. And we're going to spend the next hour or so sharing practical information and exploring how your values, your faith, and your generosity can come together in a lasting legacy. Here's a general roadmap of what we'll cover in the next hour. So let's jump right in. If you Google the word legacy, a number of definitions will pop up. For what we'll be presenting today, here are the two definitions that are a relevant starting place. In this presentation, we'll be looking at legacy as the money or property that is given to another person or organization via some kind of planned giving vehicle, such as a last will and testament. And Karl, you can advance the animations. And legacy can be something else, perhaps even intangible, that is handed down. We can pass down more than physical possessions and monetary assets. We leave things behind like stories, family recipes, values, faith and spiritual practices. We leave these things behind, both as a way to be remembered and as a way to create a path for others to follow. Scriptures throughout the Bible tell us about the importance of legacy. Here is just one example from Deuteronomy chapter 6 that comes after Moses shares the 10 Commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. In this passage, there is an emphasis on remembering, teaching, and passing down God's truth. Legacy is something that is woven into who we are called to be and what we are called to do as people of God.
Thanks, Sandra. Absolutely lovely. So yes, your legacy, telling your story, it matters. In planned giving, I've been in planned giving for quite some time. I came from banking where it's financial transactions. There's no story to a financial transaction. People would think I'm nuts to share a story during a deposit or a withdrawal. But in planned giving, the story has turned into my very favorite part of any gift. I remember every single gift where I know their story, every single one. In fact, I get to continue saying their names and telling their stories and retelling to congregations so that the congregation still feels like they know them. So people that they never met understood their why. And where I don't know the story, I have nothing to tell but the size and impact of the gift. So essentially, it was a financial transaction, perhaps a line item. I am still quite grateful for their gift, and I know that there was a story in there somewhere because they took the great effort to make a gift. But I don't know whom to remember, why they cared so much for us, whom they hadn't met. So maybe telling a story feels hard. I'll confess it's really hard for me. So a lot of pointers I've learned along the way are things that your loved ones and close friends would really want to know, like key moments in faith, transformation, struggle, and victory. Who or what had significant impacts on your life? With whom did you spend your time, and what was important to you? What traditions would you pass down, and what are the hopes and dreams for loved ones or for your church? Any combination of these nuggets would be a benefit for any of us to know about you. Then lean on this to develop your legacy plan. There are really two parts to a legacy plan. Passing along your valuables, your things. These will get passed down. Even without a plan, there's a state plan that might not recognize what you would want it to do. And then there's passing along your values, your faith. Passing your values is optional. So oftentimes it may be left unsaid. We're going to get specific now because most of us never get around to doing these things. We intend to, but we don't. Top reasons are procrastination. For estate planning, they say I don't have enough assets, or it's too complex. Maybe I don't have the right, maybe it's too expensive. And I don't know where to start. So let's lower the barrier to entry by describing next steps. First, an ethical will is one way to share your values. And then second, your estate plan to share your things. Now, fortunate for you and for me, we get back to Sandra to walk you through these tools.
So let's focus on that values part of your legacy right now and some ways that you can intentionally pass down that part of your legacy. In just a few minutes, I'll do a deep dive into the components of a last will and testament, or a will, and most of you are familiar with what that document is. But I want to talk briefly about something you may not be familiar with, an ethical will. An ethical will is a non-legal document or other recording that you can use to pass down those intangibles like core family stories, life lessons, values, wishes for your family's future. Ethical wills can also be used to explain decisions that you've made in your overall estate plan. Ethical wills are not autobiographies. They're relatively short, 5 to 10 pages, which makes creating an ethical will an accessible way to pass on those values. Again, I do want to emphasize that an ethical will is not a legal document, but it's a tool to intentionally pass down intangible assets. And because of that, there's no real right or wrong way of how to compose an ethical will. If you're interested in learning more about ethical wills and composing one, there are many free resources and worksheets that you can find online if you just Google ethical will. And there's also guided workbooks that you can purchase. In addition to an ethical will, or instead of an ethical will, you can get creative with how you wish to pass down your intangible assets. You can write a book. You can create a video. You can make a website or a blog. With technology today, there are a variety of ways that you can pass down your valuables and stories, your values and stories to future generations. I came across a Facebook post this morning about an article on The Atlantic. It said, "You might think you already know your family's story pretty well, But do you really know as much as you think? The article features anthropology professor Elizabeth Keating, who shares that some family anecdotes get passed down from generation to generation, but that many of us have no broader sense of the world that our parents and grandparents lived in. What were their early lives like? How were they raised? What was their childhood neighborhood like? Keating says, a kind of genealogical amnesia is eating holes in these families' histories as permanently as moths eat holes in the sweaters lovingly knitted by our ancestors. We have ways to share these stories, but it takes intention. So consider taking time to share stories and to share what you wish people remember about you. This can be such a gift to your loved ones who live on after you. Let's jump into what is estate planning. So it's the preparation for the distribution and management of a person's estate through the use of wills, trusts, insurance policies, and other arrangements to reduce administration costs and transfer tax liability. Today, estate planning is comprehensive, and it can be used for the management of a person's assets and for the care of a person during their life should they be incapacitated. So next slide, please. So why do we, as the Presbyterian Foundation, a church organization, spend a lot of time and energy educating people about estate planning? Because estate planning is part of who we are called as being good stewards of the resources that God has entrusted us with. As my colleague Ellie shared, stewardship is at the heart of who we're called to be as people of faith. It's how we respond in gratitude to the goodness of God. Estate planning offers us the opportunity to plan for the many assets that we have at the time of our death. Estate planning is also a gift to your loved ones. It can help ease the challenges of managing your care and your assets as they're dealing with stress and grief or mourning your loss. For the remainder of this presentation, Karl and I are going to share different estate planning vehicles and documents. Hopefully, you'll spend some significant time to consider a comprehensive estate plan that includes planning for both your assets and your values so that they reflect the legacy that you hope to leave. But with my lawyer hat on, at the very least, I recommend that all adults 18 and up have at minimum 3 legal documents: a durable power of attorney, a healthcare directive and designation of healthcare surrogate, and a last will and testament. My disclaimer is that the next several slides are for informational purposes only, and that we recommend that you reach out to legal and financial professionals for professional advice regarding your particular needs and circumstances. So the first estate planning document I'm going to discuss is a durable power of attorney. This document guides decisions during your lifetime and is ineffective upon your death. A durable power of attorney, also called a durable POA, is a legal document where you, the principal, authorizes a person to serve as your agent, having power of attorney on your behalf, even upon your incapacitation. Every now and then I see a joke floating around the internet with a quote, "Why do attorneys specify that they're attorneys at law, as if there's any other kind of attorney?" But there is. Someone with power of attorney is called an attorney in fact. And you do not need to be an attorney at law to serve as an attorney in fact. With this document, basically anything that you could financially or legally bind yourself to, your attorney in fact can sign on your behalf. So you want to make sure that the person or persons that you name as having power of attorney are people that you deeply trust. You can limit exactly what powers you give to your agent, and you can decide whether that document goes into effect immediately or only upon incapacitation, which is the point at which your medical team determines that you don't have the mental capacity to make those kinds of decisions, or if you physically can't, like in the case of being in a coma. The next essential document is a healthcare directive and a designation of healthcare proxy. These are actually two separate legal documents that are often combined in one, and the name of the document may differ depending on where you live. They can also be called living wills, healthcare power of attorneys, advance directives. Many states require a separate power of attorney for healthcare decisions, and this authorizes your healthcare proxy to speak to your medical team, to get around HIPAA privacy laws, to access your medical records, and to make decisions with your medical team regarding your care. This document is effective only if you are unable to make your own medical decisions. The healthcare directive or living will comes into play when your medical team determines that your body is being physically kept alive by life support, a feeding or hydration tube, and or a ventilator, and that you likely won't recover. You can make the decision in advance that if you are in that medical state, you can choose to be removed from life support, you can choose to remain on life support, or you can choose to let the person you name as your healthcare surrogate to make that decision on your behalf. The next document I'll talk about is the last will and testament, and I'm sure that all, if not most of you who are viewing this presentation have heard of a will. This is the document where you decide what happens to some of your property upon your death. If you die without a will, state laws and or the court will determine who receives your property. All states have what are called intestate succession laws. It's kind of an inheritance flow chart. Again, this varies by state, but generally your property goes to your surviving spouse if you're married, and or your children if you have any, then any living parents, siblings, then down the line. There may be a difference in how real property and personal property are distributed. And it doesn't matter what wishes you may have verbally expressed in the past, or maybe texted or emailed your wishes to a loved one. If your wishes are not stated in a will that is executed according to the requirements of the state where you live or where your property is located, then the estate intestacy laws will determine the distribution of your property. Within this document, you name an executor to manage your estate and beneficiaries to receive your property. Beneficiaries can be individuals or organizations such as your church. For adults with minor children or other dependents, you'll also want to name a guardian who will provide the day-to-day care for your dependents. And you'll also want to name a trustee to manage the property that your children or other dependents inherit from you. You can choose the age at which they receive the property, or if no age is stated, they will receive their inheritance at the age of 18. When creating a plan through your will, you'll want to do some kind of inventory of your assets. Wills only govern what are called probate assets. And the easiest way to understand what a probate asset is describe what a non-probate asset is. A non-probate asset is any property that's governed by a separate document. For example, if you have a life insurance policy with named beneficiaries, that life insurance policy is a non-probate asset. It is not subject to your will and will be paid out to those named beneficiaries without going through probate. Another example of a non-probate asset is a home that is owned in joint title with right of survivorship, and that particular language may vary by the state you're in. Upon your death, the home would immediately pass to the surviving title holder. After you inventory all of your assets, if there is anything that is of a particular emotional significance or value, you may want to consider leaving a specific bequest. An example of this is, say you want to leave a ring that's been in the family for generations, or a stamp collection to a particular individual. You'll want to describe that item sufficiently so that's clear what you're talking about. So for example, instead of saying grandma's ring, describe it as grandma's 1-carat ruby ring with small diamonds on the side set in 14-carat yellow gold. For all your other assets, things just everything else that you own that may not have that particular emotional significance that you want to pass on, you should consider simply leaving a percentage of your assets to the beneficiaries because your assets change over your lifetime. And if tithing is an important spiritual practice for you, leaving a bequest of 10% of your remaining assets to your congregation would be a simple way to live out that practice as a part of your legacy. One of the reasons it's important to do a rough inventory of your assets is to reduce your tax liability. In reality, most of us will never have to worry about estate taxes because the lifetime estate and gift tax exemption is high, currently $13.99 million. If you do have assets of a few $1,000,000 right now and you anticipate that those assets will grow, you should consider advanced estate planning. A will alone may not be the best way to distribute your gifts. A will shouldn't be a one and done process. During your life, your assets may change significantly or your life circumstances may change. I recommend that you revisit your will every, say, 5 years or sooner if you experience a major life event, such as the birth of children or a marriage or a divorce. Read through your will and make sure that it still reflects your wishes. If your wishes have changed, then you'll want to update your will. A codicil is an update to an existing will, but nowadays attorneys usually draft and execute a completely new will rather than amend by codicil.
So good. Thank you, Sandra. Now let's pivot to the charitable part of an estate plan, planned giving. Let's start by looking at a pie chart here. This pie chart is the typical breakdown of assets for an average U.S. household. One very small portion, about 9%, is in cash or savings. The rest, this other 90% of our assets, are in resources that we cannot share today. They're busy. They're being used, like our home and our car, or they're earning some income for us, like our investments, and further down the road, our retirement accounts. Yet one day, we are all, every single one of us, going to be finished with all of this stuff. It's all going somewhere to someone. Then in this process, we point our massive 90% of our resources that are right now busy, we get to point those to support and care for those people and those places that we cherish. So here we have the opportunity to decide who uses these resources to continue on our story on our behalf. We're talking planned gifts. But before we launch, I'm going to restate Sandra's important words that these slides are for informational purposes. We recommend that you reach out to legal and financial professionals for any advice regarding your needs and circumstances. Onward to our planned gifts. Check out these most common planned gifts. It's a shorter list than there really is, but these are the most common. And today we're just going to dig into the top 5. The bequest, we've already addressed a little bit of that. Retirement plan beneficiaries, beneficiary designations, charitable trusts, and donor advised funds. Starting at the top where Sandra handed it off is the will. Writing the gift in your will is a fairly simple piece of an estate plan. You have a heart for ministry. You simply consult with your attorney to include clear language about the gift you want to make. So that after your lifetime, the distribution is made to the church and then to heirs as well. One bit of advice from experience is if you've made one of these gifts, consider letting the church or the charitable organization know about your gift. If they know in advance, they are far more able to put your gift into action without any delays. There are some very common obstacles that are really quite easy to avoid. And wouldn't you hate it if your gift were stalled or somehow caused unnecessary confusion? So that's a bequest, a bird's eye view, if you will. The second most popular planned gift are qualified retirement assets. You can include your church or the Presbyterian Foundation or your favorite charity as a beneficiary of your qualified retirement account. You'll recognize what these are if I name a few, like a 401k, a 403b, and an IRA. We're not including Roth accounts here. They're also very good gifts, but they are treated differently. So let's bring back this chart of the average asset allocation, average net worth in a household in the United States. Look at this golden slice of pie. That's the IRA. Nationally, almost a third of our personal assets are in retirement accounts. So in size alone, that makes the retirement accounts a major and powerful potential gift. And here are two features that make it even better. The first is tax efficiency. Tax benefits are going to make a lot of people fall asleep, but stay with me for just a moment. I'll make it really brief. Any portion of an IRA, when distributed to you or to your heirs, will get taxed. An IRA passed to your church won't. So a $100,000 IRA going to an heir with a federal tax rate of, let's say, 24% gives your heir $76,000, but your church would get the full $100,000. And maybe you would want to consider sharing that IRA with the church if it doesn't get taxed. And those gray slices of pie, those might be better for heirs because those gray slices, in almost all cases, most cases, don't trigger income tax to your heirs. So you've just dodged some taxes by planning. Now, the second thing that makes these really exciting is simplicity. There's the beneficiary designation is not controlled by the will. So it transfers directly to the beneficiary, bypassing will and probate. That's what Sandra referred to as non-probate assets. And it's all very ultra low effort. If you decide this is right for you, simply request a beneficiary designation form from a plan administrator, or you can often get these online. Complete the form and, importantly, return it to the plan administrator. That's often overlooked. And after your lifetime, the remainder of that retirement account is distributed to your church or to your preferred charity. Note, transactionally, it doesn't get much easier, but again, consulting with professional advisors is recommended because this is a significant portion of most people's assets. And your mix is going to look different from other people's. Onward to the third most popular type of plan gift, account beneficiary designations. This is really similar in concept to the retirement beneficiary designation. You can include your church as a beneficiary of a bank account, an investment account, or of a life insurance plan. Let's go back to this pie chart to look at how much is, on average, allocated to our bank and investment accounts. That's 26% of household assets. This is another very large gift opportunity. So why is it popular? Like we referenced earlier, it probably doesn't have the same tax benefits because these are already taxed assets when they hit these accounts. But simplicity, it's really easy to set up these accounts quick with a form and no cost. It's flexible. You retain full control of this account during your lifetime. You can use it, move it, close it whenever you want. You can even change the beneficiary if your priorities shift. It avoids probate. The account goes directly to the beneficiary. And we referenced life insurance. While that is a different product, it is a similar process to change the beneficiary to be the church. As far as tax treatment goes, there's no immediate income tax deduction because this gift is made after one's lifetime. However, this may reduce estate taxes if your estate is subject to those. Let's just look at this process. Again, you have a heart for ministry, and if the beneficiary designation is right for you, you can request a form from your financial institution, complete it, and return the form. And then you've arranged a future gift of the remaining cash in a bank or securities in your investment brokerage account. We've already talked in the average household, assets are more than 50% that can be distributed by beneficiary designation. So even though we've retained a legal and financial advisors to help craft our estate plan, it is not uncommon for less than half of the assets to be governed by the will. So by using these beneficiary designations, we might inadvertently sneak the majority of our resources around a more coordinated process. Just another reason to use a financial advisor. All right, the fourth most common type of plan gift are trusts, charitable trusts. These are exciting. The charitable remainder trust is a way to make a future gift to the church or a mission while receiving income during your lifetime. Another kind is a charitable lead trust. This is a way to make a gift to a beneficiary for a certain amount of time before the trust assets are then returned to the donor's estate. We're not going to address the lead trust much because these are usually for much, much larger estates and are relatively uncommon. So we want you to know about it, but won't focus on it here. Trusts help solve issues that arise usually from higher net worth households. So I'm going to bring a pie chart in that looks like what we've been looking at, but it's different. It's how assets are broken down by percentage in households for between $1 million to $10 million. It's a very different breakdown. Believe it or not, this is not at all an unusual profile in our pews. I would say that it is even a common profile. So we do need to talk about it. Essentially, these are the benefits. It provides an income for a lifetime or a term of years. It can reduce income taxes. It can avoid certain parts of capital gains taxes. It can reduce estate taxes, and it helps you contribute to a charitable cause in a very big way if it's something that you're passionate about. Generally, how it works, you gather a team. It's great to have a financial advisor to help you evaluate income and tax implications and what assets are best to fund the trust with. You need a trust and estate attorney to draft the documents, a trustee. So there's some players involved here. It's not a simple beneficiary designation. Once you establish and then fund the trust, you're eligible for potential tax deduction and some benefits with capital gains, and you start receiving that regular income for life. And after your lifetime, or the recipient of the income's lifetime, the remainder goes to, let's say, a church, your church. And let's wrap it up with number 5, the 5th most popular and my favorite. It's the donor advised fund. I mean, I really love this one. Once you have a donor advised fund, it is very hard to imagine life without it. As a testimony plan gift after our lifetimes, basically you can include your church as the beneficiary of the final distribution from your donor advised fund, but that's kind of the last statement that I should be making because I need to tell you about what it is first in a very short time. Effectively, this brings great simplicity to all of your giving now, today, and in the future. It's very tax smart, and it's a whole lot less work than our regular giving on an annual basis. Those are some big statements, but from my own personal experience, I would back those up and shout them from mountaintops because it helps manage all of your giving in one simple fund. You establish your own donor advised fund and you transfer cash, which is not as tax advantage, but more preference would be towards transferring appreciated securities into your donor advised fund. It's one big gift, and you can make multiple as often as you want into your donor advised fund. This fund then holds your giving assets, and it waits for you to give advice on where to send those gifts. In transferring larger assets, you can avoid capital gains for all of your giving because that one gift you can disperse into multiple different places at multiple different times, and you get the income tax deduction by making that gift. So is it fantastic? It is. I'm going to move on in the interest of time, but I will say if you don't have one, remember this when you're writing those checks to all the places you make gifts, or transferring appreciated securities, or gathering your gift receipts to all of these different places. remember that it could be so much easier. And there are great resources like donor advised funds to make your giving so much more enjoyable. So there it is. Now, preferences. There's three. Once you've decided how to make your planned gift, you might feel compelled to guide your gift what to do. The big choice is between restricted and unrestricted gifts. In other words, letting the church decide how to use it versus dictating how the church should use those funds. Unrestricted gifts, it's really one of the most powerful choices because it means that you give the church the ability to use these funds in the smartest way that they see possible to meet greatest needs at the right time. Let's turn to those gifts where you have something specific you'd like to happen, like restricted gifts. It might support a program of your church or a specific program of the PCUSA or any other Presbyterian organization. With restrictions, the church will have less flexibility to respond to future opportunities and challenges that we cannot foresee today. In fact, the more layers of restrictions that we apply, the more difficult it is for a church to find purposes to match the donor's intentions. It is not common, correct. It is not uncommon for a church to have literally dozens of restricted funds from decades ago that are now very difficult to find an outlet for the good that they can do. Okay, so for these reasons, if you are doing a restricted gift, it is a great idea to coordinate your restrictions with your church leadership to make sure that it's great for everyone. A third idea for preferences is an endowment fund. This can be a memorial or a permanent fund that is an enduring tribute to a spouse or a family member. Another popular use is setting this up to endow your pledge, to continue your giving and growing your giving every year to all future generations after your lifetime. In a nutshell, the Presbyterian Foundation manages a very large number of these for more than 200 years. And so they're quite good at this. And they would receive a gift to the Presbyterian Foundation to be invested and pay in perpetuity to the charitable beneficiary that you select. That's how an endowment often works through a foundation. The details are here. Let's move on to our third, let's call it chapter. Let's talk now about sharing this opportunity with others in our congregation. There are so many who are not engaged in planned giving because they don't know about it, or they think it is only for the wealthy, or they think it's for older people. Yet, frankly, this is far more relevant to far more people than we've ever imagined. So I'm going to talk about a couple of data points to back that up, and then we're going to turn to those resources to help us and you teach others. So this is a fact. More of us need to know about planned giving. Planned gifts are the gift of a lifetime, no matter how modest or abundant your means. This is the most transformative gift that most of us will ever make, and I mean by far. I'm going to share with you from an IRS white paper from many years ago. We took the average bequest size for nonprofits in the United States. So this is not just churches. This is for nonprofits and churches. I want to show you how large a planned gift is and impactful compared to someone's regular giving. This green circle represents lifetime annual giving to the church or nonprofit. Then on average, this blue represents the size of their bequest. The last year of this report, that we did this report, the planned gifts were about 2.74 times the size of a giver's cumulative lifetime giving. So on average, bequests are the greatest gifts that a donor will ever make. That's our greatest gift. It is noted that this is an older figure, but we believe that this ratio is a sustainable one because the generational transfer of wealth is forecasting that we are still in the early phases of a much larger transfer of wealth to charitable causes, much, much larger than it's been in the past. More of us are interested in planned giving, but not doing it. Of the 47 billion that came in bequests last year, only about 5% of Americans plan to bequest. 1 out of 20. Okay. But how many do you think would leave a bequest if they were asked or if they were somehow engaged? The number is 28%. Actually, the percentage is even a bit higher for Christians, who are the engine behind the vast majority of charitable giving. But we're going to stick with 28% for now. However you read this, it is a huge opportunity. 5 times more people than leave a bequest are actually open to it. And more of us need to be aware. Does this sound right? We are targeting our various older membership. Well, how old do you think the average plan giver is when they wrote their first plan gift? According to a study of plan givers by the Giving USA Foundation, on average, plan givers wrote their first plan gift when they were 53 years old. So the 40s, 50s, and 60s are proving to be the peak years for plan givers writing their first plan gifts. And are we talking to them? Final data point, how much should a church expect from bequests in a given year? So of the Presbyterian churches who reported their financial data, about 31% of them, in our last survey, 31% of them reported receiving a bequest. It might feel low to some, but this number has blossomed since the 2010s from 26% receiving bequests now to 31%. That's really an enthralling start, hopefully continuation of a trend. Now, how much was that bequest average of those who reported a bequest? Of those who reported a bequest in the 2010s, 53,000 was the average bequest revenue. And in 2022, it popped up to 60,000. And in 2023, it spiked to 72,000. This is an amazing source of energy for ministry. And yes, if you're wondering, does church size impact this? It does. Just kind of on either end of size. Churches up to 100 members, their average is about 27,000. Whereas 1,000+ member churches, their average bequest revenue in the most recent year was 207,000. So again, much more opportunity upcoming with the generational wealth transfer. So we need to work with our congregation on establishing their legacies now. So I'm going to hand this back over to Sandra to share some of these exciting resources to get us there.
I know that Karl and I have presented a lot of information today, but remember that the Presbyterian Foundation is here to serve you and your congregation in your legacy giving needs, and we have a wealth of resources to support you. On our website, if you click on the resources link, there's a drop-down menu, and one of those links is for the Center for Print Resources. You can go to this page to download PDFs of bulletin inserts about leaving a legacy and planning guides for both individuals and church leaders. We have these documents available in English, Korean, and Spanish, and you can order physical copies of the brochures to be mailed to your church. Ellie mentioned in her presentation about Stewardship Navigator, this free resource that has been created by the Presbyterian Foundation. In addition to providing recommendations for a strong annual stewardship program, including a narrative budget builder, there are resources to help your congregation build a legacy giving program from the ground up. There are sample endowment policies, investment policies, and gift acceptance policies, examples of brochures to promote legacy giving. And you can even create a planned giving website for your congregation and link it to your church's website. To register, simply go to stewardshipnavigator.com and you can search for your church by your church PIN or by your name, city, and state. Plan Giving Navigator is a fee-based service. So for the majority of churches in the PCUSA, the plan giving resources found on Stewardship Navigator will be all that you need to build a strong legacy giving program. But for congregations who may be interested in a more one-on-one support, or for those who are particular with their branding and marketing, then Plan Giving Navigator may be a helpful service. And finally, reach out to your ministry relations officer in your region. Your MRO is available to meet with your church leaders and to help you develop or strengthen your legacy giving program, and to help you integrate legacy giving into a holistic year-round approach to stewardship. MROs are also available to work with individual donors and to help them consider different options to create their legacy giving goals.
Thank you, Sandra. I wanted to give one last note about the capstone on a planned gift. Invite them. Invite them to share their story. Help plan givers make this transaction into their legacy. For most of us, it may feel awkward and unnatural to reach out of nowhere and volunteer our story. So regularly, we, the church, can invite the congregation to share the news of their gift and a little bit about their why, so that future generations can have the benefit of knowing them. And importantly is the next step. It means tell their story. Once you've received their story, keep telling it. And then plug in their stories at different times in different ways. In the interest of time, I pulled out this really brief one that I just found beautiful. It's a simple blurb from a church that this church regularly thanks past givers in different media. And here's a really quick, short one. I'm going to read it as we close out. Edna went home to be with the Lord on August 27, 2002 at age 82. She never married but had 2 cousins who lived in Missouri. So most folks who knew Edna said she had no close family. I've thought about that phrase, no close family. And the more I've thought about it, the more strongly I feel that Edna Martin had more close family than most of us will ever have. And most of her close family was centered at her beloved church. Yes, Edna remembered her family, her church family, and her will. You and I are part of Edna's family. So thank you. Quick thank you from me for spending time with us today and thinking about the legacy of your membership and of your church and how we can keep providing our faith, providing our ministry for the next generations. Sandra, are you?
Thank you all for attending this webinar, and I guess I'll turn it over to Joseph just to run the Q&A session.
Great. Thanks, you two. Thanks again for everyone who's here. We've had several questions come in. I've been trying to compile them as they've come in. One person asked, any tips on using the church as a beneficiary on an insurance policy? They noted that they found insurance companies to be difficult to work with.
I guess I can answer that. I guess I'm curious what has the difficulty been, because I know that for my own life insurance policies, just when I can request a beneficiary change form and just include the name of the ministries that I want to support. And I just be as clear as possible, formal legal name of your church or ministry organization and current address would be helpful when you name your beneficiary. But I'd say I haven't personally run into any issues. Karl, maybe you have a response, but you should be able to name a nonprofit 501c3. Shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, the way that we described it as the beneficiary designation is usually pretty straightforward, and difficulty could arise. There are other ways that you can do gifts of insurance that are more complex, and that might be a more difficult thing when working with insurance companies, but I haven't encountered many of those, to be honest with you. Most of the gifts we know about with life insurance are where you just have the beneficiary and don't necessarily transfer ownership of a policy, for example. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer.
Yeah, thanks. I think the key in that is making sure that whatever documentation an insurance company needs is correct before we die. Yeah. Someone said my time, talent, treasures team has been working to collaborate with our trustees on delivering training to those interested in our congregation on legacy giving. They said this presentation is exactly what they were thinking about, and they wondered if any or all of this can be used for that purpose. Yes, you may use this recording however you would like. And like Sandra also said, you've each got a ministry relations officer who does this work all over the country, and we are in churches almost every weekend or during the week. And feel free to reach out to your ministry relations officer as well. Someone asked, what is the best way to counsel members that want to give shares of stock or other investments? Um, the question was, should they liquidate and create a donor advised fund? Can the Presbyterian Foundation manage those types of gifts? What would you two say?
Yeah. First thing is, if you want to make a gift of appreciated securities, don't liquidate them and then fund anything. Transfer those, because if you liquidate them first, you will be hit with those tax consequences, capital gains most likely. But if you transfer them to the nonprofit or the church, then you won't have the capital gains. The church is not liable for that. Yes, the donor advised fund is actually, it's my favorite, so I'm going to say it's the perfect tool to transfer appreciated securities to, because you can do it all at once and then give multiple gifts from that. That one's fantastic. And the Presbyterian Foundation does have a donor advised fund. It is fantastic. My gifts all go out from the Presbyterian Foundation. I use the portal online and make my gifts. I just tap in the name and EIN or whatever it is that's an identifier for any organization, and that gift is advised and sent from the Presbyterian Foundation. There's other ways to do it. I find that the donor advised fund is ultra simple because you can make one transfer to multiple purposes.
And
Hope I answered that. Okay.
if someone from your congregation wants to make a gift of appreciated stock and you're not sure how to handle that, reach out to your ministry relations officer. For churches who have endowments with us, if that transfer is being made into the endowment, we can do that. And even if you don't have an account with us, we're happy to help and we do that transfer for a small fee.
Yeah. Someone asked what the difference is between an endowment and a donor advised fund.
I'm happy to take that question. In terms of the potential tax deduction, they're kind of similar. It's that upfront gift of a sum of money. The difference is with the donor advised fund, you're going to make grant requests from that fund and potentially spend that down. But the idea with an endowment, a traditional endowment, is that the principal, the gift that you put into it, that principal remains intact, and that the beneficiary of the endowment receives a certain percent of the interest earned on that endowment each year. That's kind of the just basics. And Karl, if you want to offer any other specifics, please feel free to do so.
I would say it's well phrased. I think the endowment is locked in perpetuity. That fund will exist in perpetuity for the original purpose. And that stream of funding also will never go away for that one beneficiary, maybe the church. Whereas the donor advised fund, as you said, it does spend down, but it can give whatever you assign it to, in whatever amount, and expire. Yeah. So there's less flexibility with the permanent fund, the endowment, but the great joy of knowing it's forever. And donor advised is just all this abundant flexibility.
Would either of you, this is a related question, would either of you like to address the way a donor advised fund can actually be passed down a generation?
That's actually how mine started. Mine was my mother's. It started because my mother was suffering memory issues. And so to simplify her giving, we started a donor advised fund for her. I was thrilled because she started inviting my daughters to make distributions from her donor advised fund to teach them philanthropy. She said, you get to distribute this in December. You go figure out what you want and come back and share with me why that's so exciting to you. And so she was teaching my daughters the joy of giving, and they were thrilled. It was more money than they would ever give from their own piggy banks. And after my mom passed away, I started using that donor advised fund with my brothers to start taking care of things that she cared about and realized that this is a great way for me to do it. I still use that same fund to give to my church, to give to my favorite causes. And we contribute regularly to that. So it's not just left over from my mother's fund. So that's a way we've actually had it move through 3 generations so far and continue.
Yeah, it's a way of almost forced charitable giving inheritance, right?
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Someone asked if there was a requirement that a disbursement request from a donor advised fund take place in a certain period of time. The concern, they said, is if not advised, it could just sit there.
There's a couple of issues here. One is, yeah, if not advised, all of this like generous funding that goes into donor advised funds might just be a pile of investments and not doing the good that it could do. That's a concern with donor advised funds, is that some people aren't spending them. Yeah, that is a concern. There has been a requirement to distribute a certain portion of them every year, but if I understand the question correctly, yeah, there's a risk of that. I hope we have people who don't want to grow donor advised funds too much, that they want to spend that money on great things. But Sandra, you might hear this differently. Is there anything you're thinking on that might be a better?
No, I'm not actually sure if disbursements have to be made in a specific amount of time. Joseph, I don't know if you have a response to that, but
Yeah, I don't think the IRS has a rule yet. I think the plan, like donor advised fund administrators, can set their own kind of rules about that.
I
But it
think
is a
historically
concern for sure.
there's been a minimum, and I think that each donor advised fund, there was a debate a while ago. Do they each need to distribute that minimum, or can the fund administrator aggregate, since it's kind of their funds once the gift's made? Can they aggregate that minimum distribution amongst all their accounts so that certain donors may or may not have to give
Yeah,
that distribution?
yeah. Great questions so far.
Yeah.
Someone asked if someone's watching and thinks we haven't talked about this stuff at our church at all, where would you recommend they start? Like, what's 1 or 2 things that you would suggest a church does first if they want to kind of dip their toes in this legacy plan giving conversation?
I would recommend that they reach out to their ministry relations officer. And I think before really digging deep on a legacy giving program, I think it's helpful to take a step back and think, how do we teach stewardship? How do we understand stewardship? And how do we live out stewardship in the life of our church? Because I think that a legacy giving program is part of a strong stewardship program. So I'd say if you go to Stewardship Navigator, see if you are following best practices for an annual approach to stewardship, and then reach out to your ministry officer and see how can you strengthen annual stewardship and how can you work towards building a legacy giving program. But that's what we're here for. I know that all of my colleagues, we love working with churches, just talking about legacy giving and seeing how we can faithfully integrate this into the life of our church.
Well, friends, that looks like that's all the questions that we've had. So we're going to finish a little bit early, but I am imagining no one's going to be super sad about that. Karl and Sandra, thank you so much for your presentation. What a day. Thank you all for joining us. Our hope at the foundation is that you will let us know how we can support you as together we make our way into the future that God has in store for us. Remember, you are not alone in this work. If there are topics that you think might make for an interesting day of learning, please reach out to your ministry relations officer or to Robyn at the foundation. You can find her contact information on our website. We exist to serve you. So if there are things that you think it'd be great if we had a couple of workshops or webinars for a day of learning, maybe in the fall or in the winter, please let us know if you've got suggestions. As we close our day of learning, I invite you to please briefly pray with me. Loving God, we are your people. And this is your church. Rooted in hope, we pray that your will would be made clear, that you might give us the words we need to tell the world just what you're up to share how much you love each and every one of us. Thank you for that story. In Jesus' name, amen. Friends, thanks again for participating with the Presbyterian Foundation today. Remember, you aren't alone. Let us know how we can help. We'll send the link out with the recording sometime early next week. Peace.